Hello, this is Allan Ruhl from allanruhl.com. I am here with John Fisher 2.0, also known as John. And yeah, I met John a while back. Met him on Twitter, and then we chatted in a Discord server. And then, yeah, we got started talking about. He specializes in Anglicanism, apologetics against Anglicanism, which not a lot of Catholics do. Because, I mean, most. We'll get into this today. So, John, did you want to lead us with an opening prayer?
Sure thing, but just as a point of clarification, while I do specialize in this specific issue, or I'm specializing in it, I still have a long way to go in terms of understanding Anglican history and theology. It's very complex in general, but hopefully I get to the point where I could say I'm specializing in this. But I would like to do an opening prayer, yes. Um, in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy
Holy Mary,
Mary,
Mother of God, pray for us sinners now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Amen. In the name of the Father, and Son, and the Holy Ghost. Amen.
So, John, since this is the first time I've had you on, just maybe explain your faith background, how you came to know the Lord Jesus Christ, and your family background, etc.
Very good. So, born and raised in the Eastern Orthodox Church, specifically the Antiochian Orthodox Church, um, was given the baptism at the age of around 1 year old. Um, and at this time, it was in Lebanon, although my family are both Lebanese and Canadian citizens. So I lived most of my life in Canada, going to Lebanon mostly for summer vacations. Growing up, I wasn't too devout, nominally Christian. Um, I went through a period of trying to be religious, it failing because teen hormones and whatnot, just became an atheist. It was during that time where I didn't take faith seriously. I thought it was fairly laughable. I then went to university. I took some courses in religious studies, and at this time, I was kind of making friends with certain Christians of a more Protestant background. They even invited me to their Bible study, which was nice. I even started looking up Eastern Orthodox apologetics, or basically apologetics for the Eastern Orthodox. And I then thought, okay, you know what, maybe this Christianity stuff wasn't too terrible. I then started to immerse myself more into Eastern Orthodoxy. And it was at this point where I was trying to be a little more serious with challenging atheists. So I decided to read about scholastic metaphysics. And funny enough, Ed Feser is a really good introduction into that. And when you start learning about the scholastics, because they provide a very great way of explaining natural theology, since you have issues explaining certain things like how is it possible for a God who could do anything to not do evil or be incapable of evil? That seems at the face of it to be, kind of an issue. Or specifically, why is it wrong to engage in homosexual behavior when it's just two consenting adults? So you kind of need an ethical background, a metaphysical background, and you have to know why your faith is justified. And frankly, it was because of scholastic philosophy that those answers were fairly easy to come by. I loved Thomas Aquinas. I loved learning about the scholastics. Now I'm really more about Duns Scotus. I think that he does a terrific job of fleshing out my own Catholicism. Sorry to all the Thomists out there. I apologize. And it was actually from that point on
We'll
where,
forgive you.
thank you. It was actually from that point in time where I went from being Orthodox to more Catholic because it was such a great deposit of learning and education. I was taken by it. Orthodox apologetics didn't really seem to do much to address um, what I consider to be the strongest arguments for the papacy, which are the biblical arguments. I think that when you read Matthew chapter 16, and when you read it in tandem, especially with Isaiah chapter 22, I know me and you have a little bit of a disagreement about how obvious that is. Um, Although, to be fair, I think I was looking at it from more of a Protestant background because when you read the Bible with Protestants, you kind of tend to de-emphasize the patristic lens at which you see the text. So that might be one issue. But regardless, it's from that and also from the need of constant confession. One thing that the Catholic Church does right, at least here locally, is it's very easy to make confession. They have one every Wednesday at a certain time and place. You could easily go to it. And when you need to work on your sins and do away with all the sins you've been dealing with, and you constantly need to appeal to a confessor, that's always been helpful too. The Catholic practice of absolution was really instrumental in my conversion as well. All that, it was just very easy for me to go into the Catholic Church. And of course, because I learned it from the perspective of Latin, and by the way, to any of the Eastern Orthodox listening, no, I wasn't a very good Eastern Orthodox practicing one. It wasn't too hard to convert me. I'm not claiming to be like this great person who was all about orthodoxy and then just went on over. No, I take it into account that Catholicism just swayed me. And while I am open to listening to Eastern Orthodox objections to the Catholic faith, I've been getting a little more into them. I've not been convinced that they really hold up that well. But who knows? Maybe a little bit. Who knows? Maybe a little more research into it might change my mind, but I doubt it.
So,
And in any
what?
case,
Oh,
go.
well, I'm just saying. Speaking of Eastern Orthodox apologetics, what in heaven's name did you do when you found out that the Catholic Church believed in the most dreaded doctrine of all, absolute divine simplicity? It's the whole reason the West is atheist, right?
Oh, yeah, okay. So this is actually one of the reasons I love Duns Scotus. So Duns Scotus has this very fascinating distinction between what's called a real distinction and a formal distinction. And of course, there's the third one, which is the conceptual distinction. Thomists do not accept accept the formal distinction. They think of it as being a false dichotomy. A false option. They think that real distinction and conceptual distinction are exhaustive, whereas according to Duns Scotus, there are three distinctions. The real one says that if there is a real distinction, then they're not only something that the intellect can tell apart, but they're separable. Whereas in the conceptual distinction, it's only a distinction you're projecting onto the object. It has no real basis. Whereas Scotists would like to say, well, no, there could
That
be
sounds like nominalism.
It is nominalism. Well, it's not necessarily nominalism because there are distinctions which are purely something that you create that don't have any relevance to the world, and yet they're distinctions you can make maybe as a helpful fiction, for example. So, but actually, let's go with how in the past we used to think of the world as being geocentric. Geocentric models are actually really helpful if you make those distinctions. If it wasn't for geocentric models of the world, we wouldn't navigate our way through North America. They had no basis in reality, but at the very least, they were helpful.
Well, tell that to Robertson Genis.
Sorry. Well, I mean, if it's any consolation to Robert Genis, I think that with Newtonian mechanics out of the way, it's fair to say that in the age of Einstein, we could say that the dichotomy between geocentric models and heliocentric models it might just so I'll just put that to the side for now.
Okay, we're lagging pretty bad here. Like I had like a 10-second space of. Okay, it seems to be doing well again. So no, that's interesting. I'm glad you looked into all this. It's some impressive stuff. Perhaps I can have you on again for that.
Could I just wrap things up about the whole absolute divine simplicity thing?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
All right. So for Scotus, when we speak of any distinction in the Godhead as a formal distinction, we're not saying that they're separable. Hence, there's no potency to introduce into God, in which case we're keeping God absolutely divinely simple, and yet the distinctions are extramental because of the fact that the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit are not identical to one another, and that's an objective fact in and of itself. And so that's not an issue either. And when we speak of any of the divine attributes, it's similar to speaking about how pure light, white light, has all the colors contained therein. They're distinct within the white, between in the light beam, but at the same time, they're not something that is just projected on into the mind. And at the same time, they're not something which is subtractable from the light. So that's one way of explaining it. But in any case,
D- does SCOTUS use that analogy? Probably not, because they didn't know about all the colors prior.
uh, I think I got the example from the Smitty, which is a SCOTUS blog. They actually do a good job of explaining this. One other way of explaining it is, have you ever seen the image with a duck and a rabbit, and it kind of looks like an illusion depending on how you look at it?
Probably if I saw it again, I don't remember it
Um,
offhand though.
there are these optical illusions where if you look at it one way, it's a duck. If you look at it another way, it's a rabbit. It's one picture, but if you think about it, it's objectively a picture of something. We couldn't say it's not a duck. We couldn't say it's not a rabbit. We have to say it's both because there's no ad hoc way of saying it's one or the other. Even if it's something that is just a quote unquote image, it has to be, objectively speaking, an image of something. We can't just say it doesn't matter, especially if someone's trying to say not only the Trinity or distinctions in God um, are not there, but even logically impossible. Even an optical illusion has to be logically consistent.
That's very true. Now, why? What prompted the interest in Anglicanism? I'll tell you why I'm asking. Because there are faiths in the world that I think pose a threat to the Catholic Church. If you go to Brazil, you got a lot of evangelicals, making headway there. Like you've got other faiths in other parts of the world. In terms of Anglicanism, I don't really see a threat from them. I think the only people that are converting to Anglicanism are people like from Catholicism are people like Michael Koren, who um, you're familiar with Michael Koren, right?
Right. At one time, he was like this staunch Catholic apologist, and now he's like, well, come on, we got to let the gays in here somehow, and the Catholic Church is being mean about it, so let's just open it up.
Yes, and in fact, Michael Koren is going for Anglican ordination. He's already a deacon and going for a priesthood. But the Catholic Church, in a famous document called Apostolicae Curae, um, talks about Anglican orders, and I know you've written a lot about this. So, um, give us a brief history of Anglican orders, starting with King Henry VIII.
All right. Although, could I touch on your question a little earlier about how Anglicanism isn't really a threat to the Catholic
Oh
Church?
yeah, sure, go
Because,
ahead.
oh, right. So, one interesting kind of change I've witnessed, at least online, is that there's kind of a growth or re or there's a new interest in confessional Protestantism. Most Catholics, we've been dealing with evangelicals who really don't have any concept or knowledge of history, at least from a popular perspective. But if you look at confessional Protestants, I would say people who actually hold to something like the Westminster Confession or the 39 Articles, if you're an Anglican, or
Jordan
the
Cooper.
or Dr. Jordan Cooper, who's a Lutheran who holds to the Lutheran confessions. They're actually people who have a notion of their history, who are trying to connect it to the past, and it's systematic, it's objective. It actually provides you a way of having a religious center, actually knowing things outside of you are making you a Christian, and not what's going on in your head, not just, oh well, I feel this way, therefore I am a Christian. No, they're actually saying the we have sacraments, we have the Lord's Supper, we have baptism. These ground us in our religious practices. We're okay with fasting, and you know what? It's a lot closer to Catholicism, and I'm happy they're coming this way. I just want to actually look at what their claims are and see if I can't just shorten that gap to swimming the Tiber. These are smart people, and I think that if they're actually coming a little closer, I think we owe it to ourselves at least to provide an easier path over the Tiber as well, because they're already accepting that a lot of what evangelicals are saying is insufficient. I think that if they're
Do,
coming all the
do you
way
think they're
here,
a
we might as
threat
well reach
to the?
back.
a threat to Catholics in Canada, America, Europe, South America, the Philippines, Africa?
No, but they can be a huge, no, definitely not, but they can be a huge asset because these are people who are taking their faith seriously. Why not have them in the Catholic Church? Why not have them in a position where they can evangelize? There are plenty who I think would, if they were convinced of our doctrine, would make spectacular converts.
That's true. That's true. Is that
Yeah.
why you're interested in Anglicanism then?
Yes, and it actually started with my friend James, who is himself a priest in the Anglican Church. We have a lot of discussions on camera and off camera. To be honest, I would like him to be a Catholic priest, or at the very least, involved in the Catholic Church and bring converts over. I don't think he'd be happy. He told me he wouldn't be happy with the ordinariate. He sees it as Anglican blackface. But um, to be fair, I think he'd at least make a very good priest in the Latin Rite, or at the very least, an Eastern Catholic priest. So who knows? I think that he might be a good asset if he were to ever change his mind. He says he very much doubts it. I'm hoping that that isn't the case, and if he isn't going to come over, I think that um, just having somebody who's intrigued enough to look at our claims and defend them is at the very least more willing. I've seen a lot of Anglicans attack Apostolicae Curae because they say when we attack their orders, they're saying that there is something which is defective about them, and it comes at a huge betrayal. Imagine if someone says your baptism wasn't valid. Imagine how insulted you would feel.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there are Orthodox churches who actually rebaptize Catholics, and frankly, if I was a Catholic, I'd be very mad unless I had a very good reason to change my mind. And I don't really fault Anglicans for being very skeptical, even especially if they're not yet convinced of the claims of the Catholic Church with regards to their orders. I think that we do have some kind of obligation to defend our claims if we honestly expected them to come over. That's a huge burden of proof we're taking on ourselves, and I think it burdens us to fall back on them.
Okay, so I mean, like you brought up Eastern Orthodoxy there for a second. Uh, the one problem I've noticed with the Orthodox Church is their sacramentology is very weak. They're not sure if someone's baptized or not.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in the Catholic Church, it's not a problem at us for all. We know what a valid baptism is, and the same goes for other sacraments such as ordination.
Mm-hmm.
Like sometimes a priest is vested, which is like a ceremony. It's not sacramental. Or sometimes they'll reordain a priest if they convert. So I mean, do you know if the Orthodox have a view on Anglican orders?
At one time, they were actually very open to accepting them as being valid. However, since Apostolicae Curae, they have not been. If you look at Saint Raphael of Brooklyn, for example, he actually changed his mind on the subject, especially after reading the 39 Articles of Faith. He pointed out um, that in I think it was Article 29. I'm not exactly sure, but he pointed out that in the 29 Articles, they call the liturgy or the Mass an abomination. Now, these are very strong words. Anglo Catholics have been since Cardinal Newman and of course Edward Pusey has have tried to reconcile one kind of staunchly Protestant reading with fi- with maybe just reading around the words and see that they're really attacking a straw man, in which case they don't have a problem with the real Catholic understanding, but it's a very hard position to maintain. So
So
I very
so wait, so like nowadays in 2020, if an Anglican priest was to convert to Eastern Orthodoxy and accepted as a minister, they'd ordain him.
they would ordain him. Yes, I would know of no exception.
Okay. Yeah, that seems about right. Because I mean, but in terms of Catholic priests, it's about again, it's half and half, right? Some would say, "Oh yeah, you're valid." Some would say, "No, we got to have one of our bishops put his hands on you." Um,
The Malachites actually, there would be no need for reordination. So the Malachites have traditionally been accepted if a Malachite priest were to apostatize and become Eastern Orthodox again, or not again, or become Eastern
yeah,
Orthodox,
I know
then
what you
yeah,
mean.
there wouldn't be a need for reordination. Which is funny because I actually spoke to Craig Trulli about it. He actually says that not only do they consider Catholic baptisms to be invalid, many actually consider the liturgy itself that they celebrate to be invalid. The priest could be rightfully ordained, but uh, but because they don't have the Orthodox faith, the sacrament itself ceases to actually be sacramental. Whereas in the Catholic Church, we draw a distinction between a mass which is invalid and one which is illicit. One which is valid, it's really Christ being present, but it's illegal to enter in because you'd be in communion with heretics.
Yeah, no, that's true. What does Craig Trulli think about Catholic baptism?
I don't think he has a position on it. I personally himself, he actually told me in a private discussion that he really has no solid answer as of yet. And to be fair, it's something he hasn't explored. So I'm not really expecting him to have a solid answer on this. It's not like I have a solid answer on everything in the Catholic canon law and why it is the way it is. I just trust the magisterium with that, in as so far as I haven't studied it.
Okay. Yeah, no, because I heard once that he had mentioned, this was back when he was on Reason and Theology, that he had been received by chrismation.
Mm-hmm.
And and as far as I know, he's only been affiliated with Pado Baptist churches um, that would baptize him. He was Presbyterian, but he was
Mm-hmm.
baptized either Catholic or Lutheran. I'm So, I mean, perhaps I should just have Craig on to answer me this, you know. But yeah, no, yeah, I think
Oh,
it'd be interesting to have him on. But no, that's certainly an interesting because I believe there are Catholic saints. Saints of the Orthodox Church, like Saint Elizabeth the New Martyr, convert from Lutheranism, who was received by chrismation. So she had a Lutheran baptism, and that was accepted in the Orthodox Church. Um,
yeah,
in
it,
well,
it
by her local bishop anyway.
Yeah, it really comes down to the communion and to the bishop themselves. Some are much stricter than others. Some will demand a rebaptism, others will not. Also, you have to consider Catholics also have more modes which are accepted. So, for example, it's okay to baptize a child or an infant in the Catholic Church, not by full immersion, but by just applying the water, by dripping the water onto the head. That's considered valid and licit. In the Orthodox Church, um, they're much more rigid on it being full immersion. I
Well,
I was baptized with full immersion, so
the this is something a lot of people don't know. But if you look at a Serbian Orthodox baptism, it's just pouring water on the head.
oh really?
Yeah, you should look it up. For those who are watching this, go on YouTube, look up Serbian Orthodox baptism. It's pouring on the head. It's not immersion.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
I always thought that I always thought that like full immersion for an infant was kind of needless. Like it's probably the safest, but in terms of no one questioning the validity, but like pouring always just struck me as being the easier option.
Hmm. So when in 1534 the Catholics in England go into schism, pretty much because of the monarch, he kind of
Hmm.
forces them into schism. But apart from chucking the Pope, King Henry VIII doesn't really change the theology, or at least nothing
No,
major.
oh no, he's actually very Catholic even onto his death. So at the point there weren't the 39 articles of religion, there were only 6. And they affirmed things like transubstantiation,
And prayers
saying
for the dead.
prayers for the dead,
Yeah.
private masses, those um, a celibate clergy.
Mm-hmm.
Just for perspective, if Cranmer's full Reformation beliefs were known, by rejecting those articles, he definitely would have been a good candidate for execution. He
He
had a
would have been
wife.
executed.
He would have been executed. He had a wife on the continent when celibacy was mandatory. Like say what you will about Thomas More putting Protestants to death. At least he believed in the Catholic faith. Like Cromwell was perfectly content with Protestants burning for believing what he believed.
Yeah, and like, have you read William Cobbett's book?
I have not.
Oh, that is brilliant. You've heard of it, right?
No.
Okay, it's called A History of the Reformation in England and Ireland, written by Cobbett in the early 1800s. And he pointed out that Cranmer, uh, he executed people. He had people executed for not believing in transubstantiation under King Henry VIII, but under King Edward, he executed people for believing in transubstantiation. I guess it's who was
Oof.
paying his tab.
Yeah. Well, well, I mean, if any Anglican is listening, at the very least, take comfort in knowing that if supposing Anglicanism is true, he didn't uh, die for his faith. So, at the very least, he would have redeemed himself for all this.
So, so he was put to death for what exactly?
Cranmer?
Yeah.
Oh, he was put to death for rejecting the Catholic faith, persecuting the church, introducing Protestant reforms into the church.
Okay, yes, that's true, but was that the reason on paper, though? Like, for example, Queen Elizabeth didn't execute Catholics for heresy. She executed them for being allied to a foreign ruler.
Oh, treason. Yeah,
Yeah.
at the time. Oh, yes, at the time.
Now, now,
Uh,
now, in all practical ways, this was for faith, but on paper, it was for uh, on paper is for treason, bearing allegiance to a foreign monarch, because the Pope was king of the Papal States. But but so like when Mary executed Cranmer, was that uh, like explicitly for heresy or for heresy, but they kind of got him somehow else?
I'm actually not too sure. I haven't looked at the trial itself. I have looked at some of the quotes from from. I've actually looked at his quotes from some of his writings just before then when he was in charge. But in terms of his recantations, all I know is what I've read on secondary sources. That is actually something I need to look at much closer. But I couldn't really tell you. I know that because religion and the state were very much aligned together, that it wouldn't surprise me if he was executed for the fact that he was allied to foreign powers or for treason against the state in addition to the heresies. But
Mm-hmm.
all I know is that the heresies themselves um, were very heavy into why he died. And to be fair, it's the same for the early church too.
Okay, so and of course, he, the Protestant side of Cranmer starts to show under King Edward because under Henry he had to pretend to look like a Catholic minus the Pope, right? Just like Henry
Right. That.
was. But
Mhm.
and so under King Edward is when they start to change the theology. They allow priests to get married. They start
Mhm.
tinkering with the mass. They
Mhm.
turn it. They take away prayers for the dead. That's what the Book of Common Prayer was. The book that took away the prayers for the dead,
Mhm.
and that apparently made a lot of people angry at the time, and things like that. So the theology starts to shift under King Edward, and
Mhm.
how does this affect the priesthood?
Oh, very. Oh, okay. So first off, they take away the sacramental nature of the priesthood. So, for example, Cranmer says that the only difference between a priest and a layman is a matter of jurisdiction rather than, any kind of inherent power that they receive. So, in the Catholic
Mm-hmm.
faith, we believe that once a priest has the ability to say the mass, he has the ability to say the mass. He has the power of saying the Mass, bring forth Christ through transubstantiation, going through all the motions. And even if it's illegal to attend his Mass, he still can bring forth Christ into the Eucharist. He's substantially present there in body and blood. And this is actually very dangerous when they apostatize, for example. So you could have a former priest saying a black mass and it being a valid sacrifice. And by the way, this actually should tell us about what Christ is willing to do for us, because if he knows that people are going to abuse that power, he dies and gives us the sacrament anyway. That is how much more we should cherish it, because of the fact that he is willing to have his humiliation known not just at the moment of Calvary, but through all times and places wherever a priest would dare abuse this sacred blessing in which he has been given. So that's one thing. Whereas for Cranmer, the difference between a priest and the laity is a matter of degree, not kind. The priest just is appointed to, on behalf of the congregation, to preside over the Mass, to make Christ present in some less than substantial way, I'd say less than substantial way, in the Eucharist. And anyone can do it. The only difference is the priest has some kind of permission. So it's something every believer has in virtue of their belief and their faith from baptism, but it's only something exercised by the priest. Whereas for Catholics in ordination, that is a power that we are given. And because it is something we are given, we could exercise it in operandi. That means in and of itself. So that's the main difference between Cranmer's idea of the priesthood and our idea of the priesthood. For him, when you're a priest, what you're doing is the equivalent of having a king select you from as a minister or as someone in his house to distribute the meal. That is the Last Supper, and that's basically it. That's the whole difference. It's a matter of distribution and dispensing. For Catholics, it's not just a matter of that. What the priest does is he doesn't merely distribute the food. He actually is given a power of Christ to transubstantiate his body, in essence, making the bread and wine something entirely new as a power that he procures through his ordination. And could I actually just read a quote from Thomas Cranmer detailing this?
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, Christ made no difference between the priest and the layman, that the priest should make oblation and sacrifice of Christ for the layman, and eat the Lord's Supper from him all alone, and distribute and apply it as him liketh. Christ made no such difference. But the difference that is between the priest and the layman in this matter is only in the ministration, that the priest, as a common minister of the church, doth minister and distribute the Lord's Supper unto other, and other receive it at his hand. But the very supper itself was by Christ instituted and given to the whole church, not to be offered and eaten for the priest for other men, but by him to be delivered, that all would duly ask it. As in a prince's house, the officers and the ministers prepare the table, and yet other, as well as they eat the meat and drink the drink. So do the priests and the ministers prepare the Lord's Supper, read the gospel, rehearse Christ's words, but all the people say thereto, Amen. All remember Christ's death, all give thanks to Christ, all repent and offer themselves as an oblation to Christ, and all take him for their Lord and Savior, and spiritually feed upon him. In token thereof, they eat the bread and drink the wine in his mystical supper. End quote. So basically what Cranmer is saying here is, the priest, all he's doing is giving out the supper, making sure people eat it, and he's reading the gospel, and that's basically it. He's not offering up to God anything in sacrifice
That sounds
either.
more like a deacon than the priest.
If anything, this is a glorified extraordinary minister.
Hmm.
Yeah, in fact, even our extraordinary ministers have this power. Like you go to, unfortunately, we have extraordinary ministers now in more masses where it shouldn't be. I mean, extraordinary should mean extra for a reason. It's not
Beyond
ordinary.
ordinary, yeah.
Yes, yes, but our extraordinary ministers can do that right now. They can distribute the Eucharist, and you are right. Even at the time, deacons took on that role with special dispensation from the bishop or the priest, if Thomas Aquinas is to be believed, which I think he is.
Although you're not a Thomist.
I mean, well, I mean, to be fair, neither are you on the Immaculate Conception.
Ooh, touche.
Yeah, touche.
All right. Um, so, what have Anglicans said in? Well, so do Anglicans believe? And you touched on this in your paper you wrote, but do Anglicans? Well, it's kind of like some do, some don't. Like believe in apostolic succession.
No, not all of them do. In fact, some of them actually think that it's a very bogus idea. In fact, if for some odd reason I was dissatisfied with the Catholic Church and I decided to become an Anglican and I hit my head or something, I would I'd take up the position of someone like J.C. Ryle, who would say, yeah, this we don't really believe in the whole apostolic succession thing. The bishops are not given some kind of extraordinary power to consecrate priests or anything. It's just a matter of their jurisdiction or ability to do so. I would not take up that position now as a Catholic, of course, but if I was an Anglican, that's the more consistent position. And I think it's obvious that that we are not offering a priesthood in the way that the Anglicans are. If I was an Anglican, I would say, alongside Thomas Cranmer, yeah, the Catholic idea of a priest is basically an exaggeration. It shouldn't have happened, and really the priest is nothing more than someone appointed to give the service and provide the real presence of Christ in the sacrament, not as a form of a propitiatory sacrifice for our sins, but rather as just a means of giving praise and thanksgiving to Christ, who is going to be present in body in some spiritual sense, and to just so uh, just so we can remember the sacrifice at Calvary, but do nothing more than that.
Yeah, and like it always has bothered me. Or like it's boggled the mind that you could believe in apostolic succession of an Anglican, but the only way you have apostolic succession is through the apostate Roman Church, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then, like I know we got like uniats, but we do believe the Greeks had the true faith for 1,000 years and a bit more. Then they kind of slowly went away, and then the uniats, we made the deals, patched it up, but like for the Anglicans, there's been like a challenge I have to all Anglicans watching this is read Venerable Bede's history of the church in England. I don't see how you can get an Anglican church out of that book. I, I,
Right.
I just don't. That guy is, in fact, I wrote an article on my website, allanruhl.com, contrast, like just showing the views on divorce, like how King Henry VIII wouldn't like that, views on the sacraments, relics, venerating saints and tombs and stuff. Like it's just, and of course, papal authority. He's fully under papal authority. In 681 or 680, I can't remember, they had the Synod of Hadfield, which it produced a creed that ironically had the filioque in it, but that's not here nor there right now. And they sent it to Pope Agatho to approve it. Why would you send it to Pope Agatho if you're an autonomous body independent from Rome? It just that book. I just think more Anglicans need to read Venerable Bede. I think.
If I could touch on something, you brought up a good point with regards to apostolic succession, because here's a distinction we rarely make. There is a succession which is juridical, and there's also a succession of order. So, for example, I'm going to pick on the society for a minute, and by society I mean the SSPX, and I'm going to use Archbishop Fillet. By the way, I don't mean to engage in SSPX bashing, but if anything, I will have to congratulate them for this amazing book, which did help me. True Pope or False Pope. It's actually a really good response to Sedevacantists, and it actually has a foreword by Bishop Fillet.
But I don't
I
think he wrote it. That was John Salza and Robert Sisko.
it is by John Salza and Robert Sisko, but I said forward by Robert Fillet
Oh,
because Fillet does write a foreword to the book.
okay.
Now,
Now,
now
I do think John Salza attends SSPX,
he does.
and I don't know if Cisco does, but yeah, that's a good book. I've got that book on in one of my libraries on the floor below me, but yeah, no, it's a
And
great book. It's something that's needed because they're so few in number, but they're very loud.
mhm.
It's
Right. And
yeah.
but just to touch on something really quickly, When it comes to apostolic succession, any true church requires two things. It requires succession from the apostles in the sense that they give you the power. So if you are a bishop and you want the power to ordain priests and other bishops, you need to get it from a bishop. However, it's not legal to just do that. So, for example, if I go to some apostate bishop, maybe with the old Catholic Church, um, maybe he has that power through some kind of simony or something. I don't know. If I'm ordained as a priest and then a bishop, I've committed something which is very egregious because even though I have the power, I don't have the jurisdiction to run it. This is why it was considered a very controversial thing. I'm not going to say it's schismatic or not. I'm punching above my belt if I was to make any declaration, but it was a very controversial thing when Archbishop Lefebvre consecrated his 4 bishops. Now, he didn't give them any jurisdiction. He knew it wasn't his place to do so. But one reason why it was controversial was because considerably, every bishop who is consecrated needs to get his jurisdiction from Rome, that is, from the Pope. Archbishop Lefebvre, in doing so, caused kind of a controversy, which we're feeling now. And Bernard Fillet, who has all the powers of a bishop, could not consecrate priests up until recently when Pope Francis gave him permission. And, and on top of that,
did Pope Francis give him permission to consecrate priests? As far as I know, it was only here confession.
I believe it's priests as well.
Really?
I could do a quick Google search on that one, but let's go with the confession one because that's a little safer. The society's priests can hear anyone's confessions because they have the jurisdiction to do so. Beforehand, if you went to hear one of their confessions, at least according to the Vatican, it would become invalid and illicit because you need the permission of a bishop to do so, and a bishop needs to have a mission given to him by the Pope. However, the society itself will say that because we are living through a very confusing time, it's hectic, it's actually considered to be something where no one can really be in a position, it's an emergency position. They have what was called supply jurisdiction.
Yeah.
Right, and that's what the society's position was. I'm not saying that's right or wrong. Again, I'm not a canon lawyer, but I will say this much: when it comes to having jurisdiction, it shows you how important it is for actually exercising your functions as a priest or as a bishop. Now, in the Anglican Church, they didn't believe that the Pope was the one who gave jurisdiction. They believed it was the king who gave jurisdiction, which is actually very interesting because I'm kind of curious as to how Anglicans in the continuing Anglican movement have any jurisdiction because they're not authorized by the state of England. So I'm not sure how exactly that is. I'd be kind of interested to hear. But even if we were to concede Anglican priests had the power of orders, they still wouldn't have any jurisdiction to hear confession, to do any kind of mass, which would be illicit. And of course, they would have no jurisdiction to consecrate priests either. And I'd find it hard even under Anglican logic to see how they would have that.
Okay, and now I don't know the year. I think Apostolicae Curae was 1896. Is that right?
Yeah, I believe so.
It's 1890s. It's Pope
1896.
Leo. Yeah. Okay. So it's Pope Leo the 13th, and what he said at the time was probably to do with the Oxford movement, right? I'm gonna guess this was the context because I'm guessing they were converts who were priests coming over. I'm just taking a guess. They were priest converts coming over. And the big question is, are they to be ordained or do they just start their ministry, right?
Right. Now, that was a good question under that. So there are 3 possible outcomes to this. One was they would be unconditionally accepted, maybe having to go through a ceremony, but that was it. Valid orders, just enter on in. The second was, we don't really know, we're kind of agnostic. Let's play it's rather safe than sorry. We're going to do a conditional ordination. So we're just going to say, yeah, we're conditionally going to ordinate you just on the off chance that you don't have any powers. And Pope Leo could have done that, and it wouldn't have been a big issue. Um, but instead, the document said, no, we've actually looked into this, and yeah, consider there are two issues with the original 1552 to 59 ordinal, which is invalid bad form, so invalid form, and invalid intentions, because they weren't trying to consecrate priests, so invalid intention, at least not in the Catholic sense, and they didn't have the form anyway of the ordination, which means that it would be understood that the effect of receiving the power of a priest had been signified. Um, could I perhaps touch on what's needed for a proper sacrament? There's four things, and I actually have a very good analogy.
All right, have at her.
All right. So if anyone understands Aristotle's four causes, it actually comes down to just that. Every sacrament needs four things. One, the proper form. So this is the formal cause. And in ordination, what the formal cause is would be a signification that the priest has received the grace of the Holy Spirit. The second one would be that the priest has received the effect or the office in the order. So it would say that this is for the office of a priest, or this would be for the power to say uh, to for the ministry of reconciliation, as it's said in the New Testament. I'd argue at the very least, or that one can say the Mass, offer up Christ in sacrifice. Any of those would be sufficient for the second one. And lastly, it has to be signified in words which the church would understand it to be. So, for example, there um, the term governing spirit, if you don't know, if you're not a Catholic who's steeped into sacramental theology, it's very hard to understand what that means, but it essentially signifies that someone has received the office of a bishop. And it's said as much because that is what Vatican II has stated, and that is what Pope Paul VI has stated. So if someone of that high in authority is saying this is what it signifies, then for all intents and purpose for the whole church, that is what it signifies. The Anglican Church can't really do that because they don't have any power from within to give that kind of univocal definition. What they have the power to do is just go to what we would say is signified and use those words, but they don't in their ordinal. They use actually the terms to dispense the gospel, be a dispenser of the gospel and the sacraments. But like I said, even an extraordinary minister can dispense sacraments, A, and B, when you've actually looked at the terminology of dispenser of the word and the sacraments, it's always been used to exclude what Catholics have done. So chances are you're not a priest in light of that. If you look at all the ancient ordinals, they usually meet those two criterias. I've yet to see an ordinal that doesn't. And the counterexamples often given by Anglicans, it's actually by misreading Apostolicae Curae, because if you read the Latin, it says that the form needs to either signify the office or the effect of the office has been obtained, whereas they read it as and. So they thought both the office and the signification of the sacraments. In which case, yeah, it's understandable how you could find all these counterexamples, but when you really do look into it, they do not have anything to go off of. And furthermore, even if they found a counterexample, that doesn't really negate what Pope Leo XIII is claiming, because they not only didn't have it, they took away any that would have the proper signification. So that also doesn't work either. And so that's the formal cause. The final cause is the intention of the minister, and the minister has to intend to do what the church does. So he has to intend to ordain a priest. And if you don't believe a priest is doing what the Catholic Church's priest is doing, you're committing the fallacy. You're equivocating in your mind. You're actually saying that not only do we not believe in that, but we're actually trying to do the opposite, or a counter example. And that's exactly what the ordinal is trying to do. It was baked up to not confirm the order of the priesthood in the Catholic sense. They have the proper matter, or the material cause, which is the laying of hands, and they do have the proper idea of a minister, that is a bishop. Although even Cranmer said that a bishop there were no bishops available, the king could just elect to appoint one as the sovereign. So even there, that's iffy. But yeah, all in all, those are the two solid issues with Anglican orders, at least in the original ordinal. They did add the office of the priesthood in 1662, but by then it was too late. Everyone,
The
all the
lines had gone
properly
dead.
ordained, the lines had gone dead, and even if it were the case that, so that's even if it was the case that it was true, but even then, their idea of a priest was still arguably a Cranmerian one. So that probably wouldn't have helped either. Like a lot of Anglicans will say, okay, but outside of the form, we still use words like priest and we still use words like sacrifice. But it's a little like the Democratic People's Republic of North Korea saying we're democratic. Like, okay, you say you are, but you have a very different idea of what the word democratic means than we do. So that doesn't help either. And to provide any signification, even if there were words to signify the effect of the sacraments in the original form of the ordinal. So that's not going to help you either. Um, and even if you look at what it means by sacrifice, they mean either a sacrifice of praise and thanksgiving or a memorial sacrifice. But they don't mean it as a propitiatory sacrifice because they don't believe it's offered up for the forgiveness of sins or the forgiveness of venial sins. Instead, and Cranmer actually explains it rather well, when forgiveness of sins is obtained during the celebration of his Mass, it's by having the presence of Christ on the altar and communing with him, but it's only done because you're praising Christ and you're remembering the original crucifixion, not because you're doing anything new. It's really a forgiveness of sins through a moral kind of appeal. This is what Cranmer says. When you eat at Christ's table, what you're essentially doing is you are appealing to him to appeal to God to grant you some sort of forgiveness of sins, which is one way of doing it, but not the Catholic way. The Catholic way is that Christ is somehow in the sacrifice of the Mass. He is being represented, and he's being represented in a way where the where it can be called a sacrifice and venial sins are forgiven. The way I like to explain it is like a time warp. Basically, Christ is present both on Calvary in the past, and when a priest says the sacrifice of the Mass, basically what he is doing is he is giving Christ's death at Calvary a new time and place. So it's not only by location, but rather it's also taking a temporal property in the past and giving it a present location. And by doing so, the minister of the Mass, the priest, is actually becoming, in joining Christ, who is the primary priest. And on top of that, when we consecrate both the body and the blood, what's going on there is we're engaging in the part of the Passion where Christ was pierced, and his blood and some water was separated from his side. So that's happening as well. And it's for the forgiveness of sins, but in application of venial sins, whereas on the cross it was made there once and for all time. Anglicans, like if you read Cranmer, he says that it's impossible for Christ to have been located in more than one place. So this is why, and Calvin believed that too, so did Zwingli. But the Reformed explanation has been traditionally he's spiritually present. But here's the thing, any sacrifice has to go through a certain kind of transformation. And so, for example, the sacrifice in the Old Testament, they went from being living to dead. Christ also went from living to dead. When it's done at the Mass, Christ died once in the past, but it's just happening in a new time and place before our very eyes. And the sacrifice and the double consecration of the wine and the the bread, that serves to be the bodily transformation of Christ right before our eyes. Whereas spirit, to be spiritually present, doesn't have that sort of transformation. It's intangible. You can't do that. So that's not really a live possibility there. So that's not really going to work. And this is why Cranmer makes the Protestant argument of the Mass being a re-sacrificing of Christ. When if you and if you actually read it in the lens of a representation of what's going on in Calvary, you get around that issue with Hebrews 10, and you don't really have that problem. It's still in remembrance of the sacrifice, but the sacrifice is still objectively there, and we offer praise and thanksgiving in addition to that too. But we still possess the sacrifice of the Mass in front of us through the sacrifice of Calvary, which is at one time present and past. If that explains things.
So John, I got another question involving nowadays. Now, not like I do know that there's no single Anglican church. I guess the church in England is the Anglican church, but there's all these offshoots, right? And you talked about how they would get jurisdiction if they don't have the monarch. And but some Anglicans, including the ones in England, and some of the bodies outside of England, have female priests and female bishops. So, do the more traditional Anglicans, like the ones who would argue against Apostolicae Curae, would they say that the valid Anglican orders uh, uh, keep going forward with a female bishop and a female priest?
Oh, so if anyone is interested, I did a video on this with my friend Father James, who is a more traditionally ordained Anglican. And of course, he completely rejects the idea of female priests and bishops. We actually did a whole video and we called it Female Priests Absolutely Null and Utterly Void. He loved the title. He liked applying it in this new circumstance. And we actually agreed, and we found scriptural support, and we found support from church tradition, which shows that, yeah, they are invalid. He would agree that you can't pass those lines alongside female bishops and priests. However, he actually writes a very good essay, if you want to see things from the Anglican perspective, called Anglican Orders from Generation to Generation. And there he actually says that, yeah, if a single female was ordaining priests and ordaining a bishop, that wouldn't be valid. But because in the Anglican Church, 3 bishops are the ones ordaining, and yeah, we Catholics do it too. It's a very tried and true tradition. Um, the uh, the lineage would not be going through that female priest or bishop, but rather it would be going through the males. And that is one counter argument I've heard.
Oh,
And that,
okay.
to be fair, and to
That,
be fair, that's actually a very good way of answering the objection, I
yeah,
think.
that's a good argument, I think. The who was it? But in terms of like, I think that's consecrating a bishop, or is that ordaining a priest as well?
Yeah, I think it is in terms. Oh, yes, it would be in terms of ordaining a bishop. Like if you had, but that's actually another issue because let's say you had one bishop, one female bishop ordaining a male priest. Well, because she doesn't have that power in the first place, his orders would have been null from the get-go too. And of course, if he would later become a bishop, he couldn't pass anything along, and that would be a huge issue.
Yeah, that would
So
halt.
fortunately,
Yeah.
yep. Fortunately, though, that's only had like a very small window of opportunity to have happened, and most of the conservative Anglicans pretty much jettisoned out of that. Um, so that wouldn't be a huge issue. And if you look at the past, for example, we've also had invalid bishoprics and priests. For example, Simon Acts. There's actually some debate about whether or not if you got something through simony that was valid, like the priesthood or the episcopate. But even presuming that it was invalid, although I would contest that, we are so far removed from the Middle Ages that because we have bishops who ordain in 3, um, that it's very hard to believe that the Holy Spirit would have let the Church lose apostolic succession by means of um, not ordaining, having the wrong combination of priests and bishops. I think that the Holy Spirit would have been involved in keeping our line stable, and I don't think it's a really good objection for an Anglican to make either, because if we were to acknowledge um, our orders as being invalid because of that, well, there goes Anglican orders too. So that's not very helpful. Some
Yeah.
Anglicans, yeah, some Anglicans try to avoid like intention as being in any way consequential to whether or not a sacrament is valid or not. And I think that it's very hard to go to that extent. For example, Mormons, they have invalid baptisms, but their form is correct. It's the intention that's wrong, and that's for two reasons. One, they don't believe that the institution is just to the new covenant. They believe it precedes it, and it continued from the old covenant with no changes. So that's hugely problematic. And two, they believe that God has a material body, and they deny the Trinity. So not only are they worse than Arians, who at the very least could be said to still have a classical sort of theism, they think that God is made of matter, just like me or you. He's a finite being. He doesn't have the requisite power to actually institute the baptism. So that's really hard to square. Whereas I've actually talked to James, and he's said that he would actually accept a Mormon baptism. I would be very iffy on that. We've actually had even councils in the early church, they recognize that some heretics, even if they had the right form, would not have had the right intentions.
To my
How they did that exactly?
knowledge, well, to my knowledge, the Vatican released a statement around 2000 2001 around there, saying Mormon baptisms were invalid. However, they didn't give a reason.
Oh, I read an article by a Jesuit on the matter. He actually gave me the two arguments that I'm using with you,
What
and
Jesuit? I
um,
don't trust most Jesuits today.
well, to be fair, Jesuits would probably, if he was a liberal one, then he'd be probably arguing why Mormons should have recognized baptisms. So, so to be fair, I think that his arguments probably were more. His argument struck me as more or less solid. Now, there could I actually touch on one more distinction between doing what the church does and doing what the church affects.
Sure.
Um, so there's a reason why we accept baptism from Calvinists and Zwinglians and other people who think it's an outward sign of an inward change or something along those lines.
Well,
And
that's
it's quite
Baptists.
oh, even Baptists will
Yeah.
accept their baptisms too. It's because they at the very least say it's a sign that someone has entered into the new covenant. And while that is true, um, we don't deny that. Like as a Catholic, I could also affirm it's an outward expression of an inward change. I just would say that the inward change happens simultaneously with the outward sign. Um, so we believe that that they do what the church intends to do, but we disagree on whether or not the church does as it. They don't. They deny only the effects of what the church does. So just to use a kind of analogy here, um, if I were to bake brownies and someone else were to bake brownies and I said, these are going to fatten me up, the other person says, no, in fact, they're going to slim you down. We agree we're baking brownies, but we disagree on the effects of the brownies. However, the Anglican is actually baking cookies and saying that they're brownies, but they now so not only do they disagree about the effects of the cookies, but they also don't even agree that, but they're not even making brownies. They might tell me they're baking brownies, but that's just nominal. It's there's nothing real about that. The recipe that they used, I could point out that yeah, when it was created, the guy wasn't intending on you making brownies. He said explicitly it's a cookie recipe. In fact, you don't even have the right ingredients of what we would traditionally associate with brownies. They're not brownies. So that's the difference between accepting Baptist or Presbyterian baptisms, but because they disagree with the effect, but rejecting Anglican views when it comes to the ordination of their priests and bishops.
Okay, so how would you? Okay, you've contrasted the Catholic view of ordination with the Anglican, the Cranmerian view, and
Mm-hmm.
so compare this to how the Orthodox Church views ordination. Then,
Uh, so I really hate to actually say this because I haven't really looked into the
okay,
Orthodox background.
that's
It's
fair.
because they
That's
have
fair.
Yeah, but could I just say one more thing
Sure,
about that?
sure.
The Orthodox seem to tie in their sacramentology more to orthodoxy in the sense of right belief, whereas Catholics, we tend to view it more as the sacraments working ex operandi in and of itself. So I think probably one of the biggest gripes I have with some, not all, some Orthodox views is the fact that they rely too much on that.
John, can you hear me?
Oh, I can, yes.
Okay. Okay, and I can hear you, so.
Oh, okay. 1, 2, test, test. Oh, you want me to continue on what I was saying?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Oh,
I,
right.
I, I was kind of curious as to why you stopped, but.
Oh, oh, someone just came in the room and talked to me. Um,
Oh, okay.
no worries. Right. So the Orthodox tie, I would suspect it's because the Orthodox tie in their sacramentology to their orthodoxy in the sense of having the right beliefs, whereas Catholics tend to believe that the sacraments work so long as you have those four causes I mentioned earlier, ex operandi. That means they work ex operando operandi, I believe it's Latin.
I
They
think it's
work in
ex
and of
operato.
themselves. Ex operato.
Operato.
Thank you. They work they work in and of themselves, and basically even if a priest was downright wrong, even if it was Hans Kuhn who was doing it, it would still be a-okay in terms of validity. Not illicit, it wouldn't be illicit, but in terms of validity it would work. The Orthodox, I don't think, draws much on those distinctions as we do, because we tend to put our sacramentology very heavily in terms of Roman law, whereas I don't believe the Orthodox are disposed to doing that.
Mm.
Now, I would be very interested in speaking to an Eastern Orthodox canon lawyer, but as of yet, I really
Do they
am
have
in the
canon
dark.
lawyers?
They should. I mean, they probably should have a means of resolving this sort of thing.
Yeah, like they've like 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 I remember once listening to a live stream, Jay Dyer's channel, and he was kind of like mocking the scholastic period. It's like, oh, they spent time debating, if a priest sneezed during the mass, is the mass valid? It's like, yeah, we did debate those things, but at the end of the day, we know what a baptism is, whereas you guys are not really sure. So yeah, we may have done a lot of crazy thinking, but it's certainly given us some good results.
But here's the thing though. If a priest sneezes, like during the words of consecration, I demand to know whether or not I am adoring Christ Almighty or a cracker. Like that's a huge difference.
Yeah.
I have a right as a Catholic. I have a right to know that. When I have a right to know that if an Anglican a priest who was not ordained is presiding over my mass, whether or not he actually has the power to do so. I do not want to eat a cracker. Again, when the Orthodox priests are considered to be accepted, I have a right to know whether or not their sacraments are valid or not. That is my right as a Catholic. And the hierarchy definitely should do that. I do not want to be in the dark about that, which is one of the reasons why I bought this book when Sedevacantists were saying the orders of my priests and bishops were in question, although that's ridiculous. Looking back
Mm-hmm.
on it now, from the research I've done, looking back on it, it's preposterous to think otherwise. And I was very concerned because I have a right to know that those sorts of things too. So I did the research. And now, if I have, the best minds around me discussing this, yeah, I'm going to put them to work knowing to help believers like me know and be assured that they are receiving the proper sacraments. So I see nothing wrong with this, and in fact, thank God the Catholic Church has put so much effort into doing so. It helps me be more certain of what I'm partaking of as a believer. This is actually what separates us from, Baptists who will baptize like 5 or 6 different times because they didn't have the right feels after their baptism. No, it shouldn't be tied to the belief of the individual. It should be whether or not it was working. And suffice it to say, it seems to have done just that.
Well, there's actually so if you talk to Reformed Baptists, they try to marry the Baptist tradition with like Luther and Calvin and stuff. And
Yeah.
really, when you think about it, the like like I was talking to one guy, I won't say his name, but he said something along the lines of, "I'm like, so you're speaking so highly of Luther and Calvin and Zwingli and all them, yet you don't believe they were baptized because they only had Catholic baptisms and child Catholic baptisms at that, you know? So these people weren't baptized." And then he said, like, they were baptized by their faith in Christ or something. I'm like, that's not baptism. You know, faith in Christ is good and important and you need it, but that's not baptism, you know? One Lord, one faith, one baptism, you know, as St. Paul
Right.
says.
Right. I think one of my favorite remarks James White has ever made was, "Look, I like Calvin, but if I was alive in Geneva, he'd probably burn me at the stake, for being a Reformed Baptist." Um, and I think that there is something very interesting about how later on we have Protestant confessions that are drawing from a multiplicity of sources who hated one another's guts. Which isn't to say that that's necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes the truth comes to you in weird ways. I think it would be a genetic fallacy to say it's false because of that. But at the very same time, just retrospectively, it's funny to think about this is how it was passed down to them.
Well, your friend Father James, I was watching one of his videos when he was talking about, uh, he said he was reviewing an Anglican book. He said in the Anglican Church there are two views of the Eucharist allowable, the Calvinist and the Lutheran view, but you can't have Zwingli or transubstantiation. And like, I felt like saying, tell that to the founder of Anglicanism. You can't have transubstantiation, but like,
King Henry.
yeah, tell that to the founder. But like, what about Zwingli? Sorry, Calvin and Luther. Like, I don't know how you could have these two wildly contradictory views of the mass. Like Martin Luther, to the day he died, considered himself closer to the Catholic Church than the Zwinglian view. He remember he's like, I'd rather drink blood with the papists than wine with the wine with the. I can't remember what he called them, but he was referring to Zwingli's crew.
With, yeah, he said, "I would much rather drink blood with the papists than wine with Zwingli." I don't even
Yeah,
think he said the Zwinglians. I just think he said Zwingli. So Zwingli was. There's debate about what he believes specifically, but most people believe that he believed in what's called memorialism, the idea that Christ is not there in anything except memory. He's only present in memory.
and most
Calvin,
Protestants alive today accept that view.
they do. And of course, to be fair, the Anglican Church, it doesn't actually hold to a memorialist view. However, they do hold to a view which is called, which so some hold to a Lutheran view, some hold to a view that is called the spiritual presence, which is Calvinistic. So Calvin believed that Christ was present in the Eucharist in the sense of, and the wine in the sense of spirit, and it is and it is because of that spiritual presence, he's there in body and blood only in a kind of virtual way. So he's virtually present there. Now,
So
this makes any sacrificial sense very unintelligible because you can't have a transformation of body and blood in terms of spirit. So there isn't a real sacrifice present there, which of course Calvin would agree with. He doesn't want there to be a sacrifice of the mass.
and neither does
But
Martin Luther, right?
no, and Martin Luther does not either. For
Because he
Martin
believed in
Luther,
like a quasi real presence, but he didn't believe it was a sacrifice.
yeah, he believed in what's called sacrificial union. So it's not. So a lot of people call his position consubstantiation, and
Consubstantiation.
that's a little unfair to him. For him, he likened. He said it was a mystery, but he likened it to how it's a mystery how Christ Himself is in union as divine and as human. So he said, in addition, the substance of the bread and the wine exist, but Christ is still there, is still present and in union with them in a very real sense.
So,
And
if you don't mind me pausing you for a second, So neither of them believe in sacrifice. Now I got a question. Does the Anglican liturgy, like the same one your friend Father James would say, does the word sacrifice appear during the prayers?
Yes, it does, but it's understood to be a sacrifice of praise and thanksgiving. That's the one it's said explicitly, and of course, some would say a memorial sacrifice too. But it's not done for perpetuation of sins. It's not a sacrifice made to appease God and forgive your sins. Rather, it's done in order to commemorate the sacrifice Christ made on the cross, and at which point in when the commemoration happens, Christ Himself then will then, because that appeal has been made, Christ Himself, out of mercy of that appeal, will appeal to the Father and then have your sins forgiven. So it's
So
so
it's kind of like they've done what to the word sacrifice, what they've done with the word priest. They've kept the
yes,
word, but they've essentially gutted it of all its true meaning.
yes. It's yeah. A Calvinist could not maintain, for example, that the sacrifice has what's called any sacrificial transformation. Um, so or immolation, which is integral to any sacrifice, really. A Lutheran could maintain that, but the difference is Luther himself stated it's not done for forgiveness of sins, or venial or otherwise. He says that they both say that it happened on the cross once and for all. What any kind of so there can only be one atonement, whereas and the Anglicans or took that position too. So there could not be any real sacrifice of the mass. And and if I could also just go on to how I don't even think that Lutheran theology is allowed, at least according to a historical reading of the 29 Articles of Faith. What's interesting is this: um, Luther, when the Lutherans actually when they were actually debating about whether or not to include, I believe it was Article 20, yeah, Article 29. There was kind of a debate about whether or not they should, because it would upset the Lutheran German princes, who, of course, did believe in such a thing. And apparently, when that wasn't going to happen, they decided, we're just going to include this otherwise. So because that took place, there was no way, no way that you could really read that in a historical context to say that, yeah, this does allow for Luther. I don't believe it did. Um,
So
so
okay, so
yeah, actually, could I just read something from
yeah,
the
sure.
Anglican historian Martin Davy? After having been agreed by the bishops, the article, that is Article 29, was subsequently omitted either during the passage of the articles through the lower house of the Convocation of Canterbury or at a later event stages due to the direct intervention of the Queen. The most plausible explanation for its omission was it was felt likely to create difficulties for those royal to Rome who remained within the Church of England, or to cause an impediment to a political or matrimonial alliance with the Lutheran states in Germany, end quote. So Article 29 is not going to be a good way of reading Luther. And in fact, it even states, there is therefore a twofold eating of the flesh of Christ, one spiritual, of which Christ treats especially in John 6:54, which occurs in no other way than with spirit and faith, in the preaching and meditation of the gospel, as well as the Lord's Supper, and by itself it's useful and salutary and necessary for all times for salvation of Christians without spiritual participation. Also, the sacramental or oral eating of the supper is not only salutary, but even injurious or damning, causing of condemnation. So, but going down, there's also another part. The other eating of the body of Christ is oral or sacramental, when the true and essential body and blood of Christ are also orally received and partaken of in the Holy Supper by all who eat and drink the consecrated bread and wine. So now, but here's the huge issue when we get to this part. Although the wicked do carnally and visibly press their teeth, as St. Augustine saith, the sacrament of the body and blood of Christ, yet in no wise are they partakers of Christ, but rather to their condemnation do eat and drink the sign and sacrament of so great a thing. So this is actually a view called receptionism, and this is something between some Calvinists like Bullinger subscribe to. He was of the opinion that that Christ isn't even spiritually present at the altar. He's only spiritually present when you receive him in communion, and it's only the faithful who could do so. And if that's the case, then we have a huge issue. How could any sacrifice be done at the altar at all? It's specifically made to cut that stuff out. Now, there is actually something in Anglican history called the Black Rubric, and basically it tried to put the very doctrine in the Book of Common Prayer itself, but um, it was it was rejected mostly due to Cranmer's viewpoint. Whether or not Cranmer rejected receptionism or not is debatable, but at the very least, because he had to sell the Book of Common Prayer to the English people, who were already pretty pissed off that it took out all the prayers for the dead, I doubt very much he wanted to explicitly say that. It was basically done as a way of moving away from Rome, but hush hush, so it wouldn't upset people.
Well, yeah, because even under King Edward, they took it step by step. Like it was
Exactly.
not like like King Henry chucks the Pope, but essentially keeps the rest, and or keeps like 95% of it. Then you have King Edward, and he's slowly year by year, and as soon as it's starting to add up, he dies, and Queen Mary takes it back to Catholic. So I mean, just think for a second. If you're an Anglican, or sorry, not Anglican, a person in England who was born in 1510, you just had to grow up, and you're just trying to be a good Christian and please God, and then it's kind of like, well, what am I going to believe tomorrow? It's whatever the monarch imposes on us, you know. It's kind of now. I do want to wrap up here, and I want you to give a last word to our Anglican friends out there who may be watching this.
Oh, give the last word. So, to any Anglicans who are watching this, I actually want you guys to think of if you have a tough time understanding or coming to our position, even if you have to reluctantly accept Apostolicae Curae, remember this much. Suppose for some odd reason that you had a priest who wasn't really baptized. Maybe he had a situation where his baptism was invalid because the priest did some kind of stupid thing where he added the name of, I don't know, a goddess at the end, or something that he couldn't foresee. And it turns out your own marriage was invalid because he was the one who officiated it. Now, did that mean that because you lived outside of the bonds of marriage for 20 years without it being your fault at all, that you gain nothing from that experience, or that there's nothing in application to joining another church like the Roman Catholic faith, that your years are wasted as let's say, a priest? No, there's definitely a lot to gain. And I think any Anglican should feel at home coming and accepting the Catholic Church and the Catholic faith. You should see Pope Leo XIII's words in the encyclical as a wake-up call that there is a definite need for not only apostolic succession, but the guidance of someone who can actually foresee and know all the issues at hand and make these wise declarations. I think that if you are of the opinion that the bull is evidence against Catholicism, I think its vindication should show that it should be evidence for Catholicism, for the power of the Bishop of Rome, and I definitely think that you should think otherwise. We do have a lot to offer. We have a fantastic mass. We are trying to bridge gaps between the Anglican Communion and the Catholic Communion right now, and I think that we could definitely use you in terms of support. And despite whether or not we think your orders are valid, you still have a lot to offer us. We do appreciate all the time you would have spent as an Anglican priest or priests, and even if you're a layman who wouldn't be affected by proper orders one way or another, just remember this also. We Catholics also study this stuff in depthly. We have a very deep sacramentology to avoid such questions and constant bickering. And I think at the end of the day, once the vindication happens, it's very evident to see how that sort of thing can come full force. So that's what I would want you guys to take away from this discussion. I'm certainly not trying to bash you guys. I definitely don't think Allan is the kind of person who wants to needlessly bash Protestants, although he might disagree. We are trying to just show you that we do have a lot to offer you, and we recognize that you have a lot to offer us, whether or not those orders that you did have are valid or not.
Where can people find you online?
Okay, I have a blog post on Medium, John Fisher
I'll
2.0.
put the link at the bottom to the blog post on your paper.
Thank you. And I also have a YouTube channel, John Fisher 2.0. You could see me debate Father James on the subject, although I do have to say that I, in in terms of getting my viewpoint in a clearer manner, which I don't think you could really get in terms of debate, you should definitely look up the articles first, because I did not really have the the depth of knowledge I had in the debate as I do now, and even now I'm still learning a lot more. Whereas Father James did have a leg up on me there because he actually studied the issue more depthly at the time, whereas I just spent a couple of months at that point learning. So, yeah, you could find me in those places as well. And thank you so much for hearing me out, guys.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us, John. And yeah, you can all go check out the website he just gave you. You can check out allanruhl.com. And yeah, you can check out all my other videos here. And John, I'm definitely going to have you back on. You're very knowledgeable. We'll definitely be talking about something else. But no, it's a good stuff. And yeah, so thanks for joining me and everyone. God bless.
God bless.